All right. So today I'm going to be talking about food. I'll start with a basic introduction about myself. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but I'll give you some hints as to how I got so obsessed with China borderlands, Uyghurs, Mongolians, and food. Um, the first topic, the first kind of serious topic, is a review of Soviet identity formations, and I'm sure that if you've had presentations on identity all year long, you're probably well familiar with this situation, the nationalities and how that came to be. But regardless, I want to review that just a little bit and show how there was a negotiation that happened, and we end up getting something of national foods. We get this idea of national foods for particular nationalities. And then after that segment, I want to talk about how the system was translated to China, because a lot of it was translated to China. A lot of it was kind of incorporated wholesale, the nationality policies and politics. But it was done with the Chinese, what do they say? Slightly differently, a little bit. With a few more safeguards than what happened in the Soviet Union. So in the Soviet Union, we have something that evolves into national foods, a kind of canon of foods that for each particular nationality. Something similar happens in China in some ways, but it also is spun as more regional as opposed to national. And then I want to kind of bring us up to the present day and look at what's happened post-Soviet in Central Asia and in China, and I want to give you several examples of things that just strike me as really interesting. They might be kind of a random mix of things at the end, but I think it'll give you some things to think about and question and wonder about. And then I hope you take that away with you and continue wondering and continue learning about Central Asian food, the history of food in Central Asia, um, and what it means. So very generally speaking, I started my experience living in China in 1995. I was a freshman in college. I wanted to go anywhere. I went to the study abroad office. What do you got? I studied French for 4 years. Can I go to France? No, that's closed. England? No. Australia? No. Those are too popular. How about China? China's open. China just opened up. You want to go to China? I'm like, I'll go to China, sure. So I went to China. And this was a really life-changing experience for me, as I'm sure those of you who have done study abroad or traveled early on in your life, you'll know how being in a different country for a considerable period of time really changes your worldview. That was the case for me. One of the things that I realized was that I could learn languages. I went through high school thinking I'm not the kind of person that can learn foreign languages. My brain's just not wired that way. After being in China for 6 months, I realized I was conversational and my Chinese was better than my French was after 4 years. And so that kind of excited me, and it set me on a path that was kind of obsessed. After I figured that out about myself, I started getting obsessed about language learning. And every people I came in contact with, I wanted to engage with in that way. So I started in China. I had the opportunity to study pipa, a traditional Chinese instrument, traditional Chinese lute, with a very famous person, and he's a celebrity now. He's on TV regularly, Fang Jinlong. Music is one of the things that took me to Xinjiang. So I was in Guangzhou at the time in the 90s, and I started traveling out west in the summertime to explore. There are certain pieces on pipa that came from that region, and it really intrigued me. And I ended up traveling out there, and I was totally blown away at the food, culture, music, the wonderfully hospitable people. And this is how I ended up getting stuck on studying Uyghurs and interested in studying Uyghurs. And the word that you see on the screen here, in English, we usually say Uyghur. In Uyghur, it's Uyghur, Uyghur. So Uyghurs would be happy if we start adopting that way of saying it because they are annoyed with this Uyghur, Uyghur. It's hard to do for Americans, unfortunately. Maybe do it all yourself. Uyghur. You're muted, but try it out. Try to get used to it. The food in Xinjiang is incredible. It's It's a fascinating mix of things, and this is the muse. This is the thing that drives me. This is the thing that makes me crazy. I crave this all the time. Can you raise your hand? How many of you know what this is? Have you had it before? Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. If you've had it before and you know what this is, you'll understand why I'm obsessed about it. Chewy noodles that are hand pulled, topped with a stir fry of seasonal vegetables, usually meat. With the flavors that go with this are garlic, tomato, chili. It's insane. It's one of the most craveable things. I could eat this every single day. Um, so lagman. This is the muse that drives me. And Xinjiang is a wheat growing region, even though there's a huge desert, there are mountains. Wheat is king, and that is used for noodles. It's used for breads, for tandoor breads, and you can see how breads are baked. You get a flatbread, you wipe the backside with some salt water and stick it to the walls of the oven that's been preheated. All the heat is absorbed into the walls, and the bread just kind of pops. And within minutes, it's cooked. Meat pies are cooked in a very similar way. Um, so this is tunur in Uyghur, tandoor in Central Asia and South Asia. It's probably very familiar to you. It's wonderful. So these experiences living in Asia, living in China, I also lived in Thailand for some time. When I came back to the States, I was really food obsessed. I started a blog about cooking with Asian ingredients from Philadelphia markets. I have a lot of writings about Xinjiang, about cooking Uyghur things, about cooking Central Asian and Mongolian things on the blog if you're interested. FYI. I also got involved with a book project. That's what I'm working on right now on the history of food in Central Asia. And the noodle remains my muse. Every time I see something that alludes to the noodle, like this is a miniature from Tabriz, 1539 to 1543. You can see a woman rolling out a noodle just like they do in contemporary Xinjiang. This is intriguing to me. I love this. There aren't so many archaeological evidences of noodles in Central Asia, so it's always wonderful to see references to it. So food and identity. These things, I mean, we talk about them generally. Yes, culture, identity, food, they're all related. But I want you to think about this in your own experiences. Take a moment, think about how you grew up, where you grew up, what kinds of things you grew up eating. Do these things tell you something about your identity? Do you identify with something because of those things? At the end of the presentation, I want to discuss this a little bit more, but as I go through the presentation, I want you to think about the kinds of things you're seeing in the Soviet context and how food and identity kind of go together. I want you to wonder about these things. It's also possible that throughout the year, you've seen other presentations about identity, and things will sound familiar. There's going to be something that will be familiar to you. Please let's discuss that at the end. Maybe there might be a reason why a particular time period happens, and then certain writings are coming out about food at that. I mean, that something else might be happening in identity at that same time. Just to get your mind started a little bit about your own food and food identity. I'm from Wisconsin. Is everyone familiar with this image? The Wisconsin cheeseheads. We're cheeseheads because we eat a lot of cheese. We're not ashamed. This is part of our identity, right? It is kind of, I mean, it's embarrassing to wear a cheese on your head, but we love cheese. We deep fry cheese. We put cheese in places that you wouldn't expect to find it, in a tater tot casserole. In Philadelphia, I now live in Philadelphia. And Philadelphians take cheesesteaks very seriously. There's even a lingo about it, and you have to order it a certain way. And if you don't order it a certain way, you're clearly you're not a foreigner, but you're a tourist or something. You're not a local. There's kind of like this us versus them attitude about this. And if you really like cheesesteaks, you know that the best cheesesteaks are at that place, not that place. You know, like there's all this stuff about this. It's really so think about this a little bit as we go along, and think about your own backgrounds and what's tied to identity for you. All right, so I'm going to start off. We're going to go pre-Soviet. I'm going to start with the Turkestan, the colonial period in Turkestan, partly because I wanted to show you some images that we have available to us. Are you teachers? Can I get just? Are you all teachers? Okay, okay. just in case you didn't know this, there's an incredible a set of photo albums, like 600 pictures, from the 1800s, with daily life in Central Asia. It's known as the Turkestan album. It's at the Library of Congress. It's online. All of the things are free and attribution free, so you can use them however you want. So I'm just going to start here with the ways that classifications of things in Central Asia kind of started a long time ago in the colonial period and the Tsarist period. Um, so uh, oh, sorry. Here we have a tandoor oven, of course, just like what we saw earlier in Xinjiang. This is outside. This particular picture is not captioned in terms of ethnicity because the ethnicities weren't really we didn't have the same words to talk about those yet, right? At this point, they're still trying to figure out what people are, how people identify, lots of things. And back then, people identified in ways that we don't even consider now, really. I mean, we like to think of that today's race, ethnic kind of things, these are all things that have always been there, but they're not. These are very, very new ideas, right? So back then, there may have been very different ways to identify. It might have been Muslim simply. It might have been city dweller, mountain dweller, something like that. That's kind of how people were categorized by higher ups. But anyway, just we'll start there. We have a kummus vendor selling kummus out of a bag, fermented mare's milk out of a bag. It's probably a skin bag. We have a woman grinding flour or grain. It's not clear what exactly she's grinding, but she's doing it with a hand grinder like this, which is how people did it for centuries, if not millennia, in Central Asia. Hand grinders, if you go to archaeological sites throughout Central Asia, you'll see these things everywhere because they kind of leave them behind. They get left behind, so they're all over the place. And the inscription for that one, or the caption, was Kyrgyz woman, but at that time, Kyrgyz probably was just nomadic person or something, like nomad, mobile pastoralist or something. We have a sesame naan vendor. We have somebody selling rice for Nowruz or vending Nowruz at a Nowruz celebration at a New Year party, Palau. And we have another image of a bakery in a city in Central Asia. And you can see the tools that they're using have not changed much. They still have that bread punch where they're punching the bread in the middle to keep it from rising in the middle so that it can kind of stay crispy and crunchy. And the access point for the oven is on the side as opposed to straight down. Really wonderful images. As you know, the languages of the region, it's a very mixed region, right? So when these early scientists and ethnographers, maybe even before they're considered ethnographers, when they come into the region, it's complicated because the cities are full of people that speak more than one language. There's a language of education, which is a Persian language. Language of home is often a Turkic language. So what are you? If they ask to the person, to the family, what ethnicity, or they're not using that word yet, but if they ask, what are you? They might get some interesting responses. I wonder if you come across any examples of maybe they're not ethnicities yet, but identities that didn't stick, that were maybe these people are called this, and then that identity kind of went away. Do you have any examples of that you've come across so far in the year?
There are sarts in Central Asia.
Yeah. Yeah. What is a SART?
Sart is a derogatory thing today, but from what I understand, they used to be anybody who's like settled as opposed to nomadic. I think that was the origin, but today you can insult people, I think, if you call them Sart.
Hmm. Yeah. So if you ask the question to somebody, what are you? They may respond with something that has to do with their livelihood. It might have something to do with their social status. It might have something to do with a job that they have. This is the case for the people who would become Uyghur in the east. On the border, you can see there's Yining. I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but this place right here, um, there were people. in this report here. I love coming across footnotes of food related things in reports like this. Taranchi is what these people were called, and Taranchi is tillers of the soil, like farmers, basically. Somebody must have been asked, "What are you?" I'm a farmer. So that's the identity that they took away. And in the report, they're talking about these Taranchi people from the Ely River area, and I delight over this because it's also noodle related. They're talking about how these Taranchi people eat ugre noodles, and they're long like the Dongan liangmian, and they don't explain what liangmian is. So that delights me. That tells me that liangmian is a known thing in Central Asia at that time. The Donggan people left violence in China and came across Xinjiang, ended up in Central Asia by this time. And they probably have been living in the region for a couple of decades, but they've influenced food culture to some degree. I might be reading a little bit into it, but that's kind of exciting. But this is just another example of one of those identities that never really stuck. That kind of so eventually, of course, we get the nationalities as we know them today, and these are classified over the years with Stalin as the Commissar of Nationalities. And this is all familiar stuff. I'm guessing you've been through this many times, right? Yeah? No? Not familiar? Oh, okay. So the idea was that they have these characteristics. You can have four different characteristics, and that will help you kind of put people into categories. And the categories that are come up with have to do with how policies, how politics will interact with those people. So um, people may have a good reason to want to be a particular category of person if that would give them rights to things, right? So in the negotiation process, as Turkestan is being reconfigured into republics, if a republic is created for Uzbeks, it may make sense to be classified as an Uzbek in order to have a voice at the table. If you, when you know, so so that's eventually what happens, of course, in Central Asia. In And I should back up just a second. Originally, that happened so that, I mean, people should have access to rights. People should have access to continuing to use their language and to continue to practice things. That was kind of a deal that was made. So there would be some sort of autonomy with this. Um, but that autonomy kind of took a backseat to Soviet development. So when new agricultural practices came about, when uh, uh, people were organized into collective farms, collectivization, that had a drastic impact on foodways and food culture in Central Asia. Um, so I just have a few propaganda posters here from the early years that still had Arabic script on them. Um, just to get us in the mood, I guess. Um, those for this, the one on the left, the caption was meant to be those who don't work don't get to eat. So the implication was the guy in the bottom was too lazy to work or something, and the buff guy on the left was the hard worker, and he deserves the food. Um, and there was a yeah. Oh, let's move. Keep moving. Gotta keep an eye on the time as well. Um, eventually, um, people from around the Soviet Union experience foods from Central Asia. This happens a couple of different places and a couple of different points. One thing that happens is that World War II, a lot of Central Asians end up fighting in the West and actually become closer with the other peoples of the Soviet Union, and have a little bit more of an attachment to the Soviet Union. At the same time, operations are being moved from the West to Central Asia because of the war situation. So there are like aircraft factories opening in Tashkent. People are coming to Central Asia to work for other reasons during this war effort, and they're experiencing things like polo, love, plov. many different words for this in many different dialects. This becomes beloved, and this becomes a canteen staple across the Soviet Union. I like to think about this, and I don't know if um, I tend to think about this in the way like Americans like Chinese food. Chinese food is kind of like an American comfort food at this point. And I feel like plov has that same kind of effect for post-Soviet peoples all the way across the post-Soviet Union. Um, so something else that's happening with the um, standardizations. There's collective farming happening. There's also standardization of food processing. So like if you can imagine, all of these peoples across Central Asia have been working in dairy products for a long, long time. They have different ways of fermenting yogurts, milks, um, kurt, making yogurt curds, different kinds of cheeses. You can imagine that there are lots of different bacteria strands all across Eurasia, and all of them would have slightly different flavors and different qualities about them. But a lot of those things were kind of standardized, and production facilities were standardized to produce large quantities of dairy products for broader populations. Something else that happened that Stalin had direct influence on moving large numbers of people into Central Asia from other places. So there's an extreme mixing happening in cosmopolitan centers in Central Asia, where you have lots of people from the Caucasus, lots of people from the Korean borderlands. You have all these different people living together, and they have very different foodways. Those foodways are also standardized and approved by different uh, like health inspection kind of agencies. So there's kind of a standardization that's happening. And the language that's being used in these regions too, like it's such a cosmopolitan experience that Russian is the dominant language, and it remains so. If you travel to Central Asia today, to the big cities, Russian is still very, very commonly used because there are so many different people there, so many different people in the cities. Um, So some of these foods, I showed you plov. This is like quintessential in Central Asia. This is kind of the national. I mean, it's often talked about as the national dish for all the different groups. So the Uzbeks have a plov, the Tajiks have a plov, Kazakhs have a plov. Everybody's got plov. Um, this is another kind of quintessential dish. It's often referred to as beshbarmak, and it might be referred to by other names like narin or ash. Um, Yet, Yet Asu, something like that. Meat is kind of the key feature of this dish. This is something I made, so so if it doesn't look quite authentic to you, it's because I made it at home here in Philadelphia. Um, um, uh, the article that I assigned, the nations of Plov and Beshbarmak, these are the two. I just wanted to make sure that you all knew what these things were. I'm guessing that they're kind of familiar to you, um, but. Um, but they are seen as kind of quintessential national dishes. Beshbarmak is more so for Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. But the word itself, beshbarmak, is kind of, I don't know if you would consider it a derogatory term, but it's implying that people are eating with their hands. But in Kazakh, I guess beshbarmak should be five thumbs. So it should be like a communal meal where everyone's kind of eating with their hands. There are other names for this that are used in native languages. Beshbarmak is the kind of the Russian label for this particular dish, and plov is the label for this dish, the prior dish. So early on, you already know that there are some of these dishes are becoming popular broadly in the Soviet Union, becoming even staples at canteens. You can go to a canteen in a very, very far away place and still have something like plov on the menu. At the same time, in Central Asia, you're going to start seeing things on menus in Central Asia that are from other places, like the Crimea. The cheburek. Cheburek is like a deep fried meat patty that's very popular all across Central Asia. It's also kind of because people were moved to Central Asia from far-flung places as well. At the same time, you have people like Yunus Akhmetjanov, who's a Tatar uh, science guy, really, but he's teaching about food ways, and he starts writing books about Tatar foods. I think his first book was published in 1958. But he has a string of books that came out after that as well, including the one on the right in Tatar about Tatar foods. So this is when food writing is starting to embrace the nation. So the great nations of the world have their own foods, so we should too. And this is kind of like an entryway to that. Um, this is Karim Makhmudov. He follows a similar plan. His first book is also published in 1958 about Uzbek food. And I think he has got like 15 books out between the 1960s and 1980s. He's the primary food writer for Uzbekistan. And even the books that came out in the 90s after independence, a lot of the books were ripoffs of this guy's work. Really incredible. I've been collecting his books. Last summer in Central Asia, I found several of his books. One of them is on the right there. Um, Eventually, what ends up happening is we get these kind of canonizations of nationalist cuisine. So we have books that come out that celebrate a nation's cuisine. And this is an example of Kazakh national cuisine that was published in 1990. And it's framed in a interesting way. I don't know if you'll find it interesting. I wanted to pause here just to kind of point this out. You see how it says second course dishes on this page? There's a first course dishes, there's an appetizer section, there's a dessert section, there's a main course section. Is that what is that like? Where does that come from? Is that it might not puzzle you at all. You might think it's universal. Like, so what? Everybody has that, right? Does anyone know about the history of that? No? So in if you go back to like 18th century, 19th century gastronomy, when French cuisine is at its height, this is actually an innovation from Russia. The idea that so in French cuisine traditionally, à la française, the chefs would finish a grand meal and everything would be out in the dining room and people would just start eating. And the food might be cold because it's been there for a long time, because things are prepared and presented in different timings. But the idea of getting served things fresh from the kitchen, piece by piece, like first you start with a soup, maybe you have salad, maybe you have a cold appetizer. This is called à la Russe, dining à la Russe. This is an innovation in Western gastronomy from Russia. So I just wanted to point that out because this is a little bit more of a direct line to like um, the yeah, you might have thought that this is just a universal thing, but in the West was influenced from that consideration, and Kazakhstan was also very influenced by that. So specifically Kazakh, I think you see that a little bit more than other places. When I get to China, the China section, I got to keep an eye on the time. Um, that this is not going to be there at all. This is not a concern for China, and because they're not even part of that world. It's like a different, thing altogether. But just wanted to point that out. Watch out for these sorts of things in cookbooks. If you see this for like a Central Asia cookbook, be puzzled by it and wonder, do they really eat like that? Or do they eat like maybe a one pot meal and that's the meal? There isn't like an appetizer or these are very Western notions influenced by Russia. So in addition to the nations that have states, there are also nationalist cuisine books that come out for nations that don't have states, like the Dongan people. Is everyone familiar with Dongan? Dongan people are a Muslim people from China that left in the 1700s and 1800s, but mostly in the 1800s, and settled in Central Asia. They had a very heavy influence on Central Asia cuisine. I paused earlier with that report from Turkestan to talk about the Dongan Liangmian. Um, uh, these books are also being published heavily in the 1980s, especially. Um, And as I was preparing today, I came across this thing and I just had to include it because it's so interesting to me. Plov was also eaten in space out of a tube because it is a beloved food. Plov is beloved. And yeah, so moving to China, uh, when the Qing dynasty fell, Sun Yat-sen is picking up the pieces and trying to put together a new China and to try to get things moving to counter foreign aggression, to make a strong new China. And he uses ideas, nationalist ideas from Germany, translated to Japan. He used to study in Japan. And this idea of Minzu is the word that is the kind of cognate between national identity, in the Soviet Union and in China. This is kind of the same word. But in China, if you look this up in a dictionary today, Minzu, it says ethnicity, race, nationality. In English, all of those things are very different, but in China, they're all kind of the same, and it's just kind of ambiguous. Sun Yat-sen, he at this point in China, he's talking about the five peoples of China. There are five different peoples of China: the Han Chinese, the Manchus, the Mongols, the Tibetans, and the Hui. Do you know who the Hui are? No?
Aren't they the Dungan people? Aren't they similar?
Yes. Yes. If you ask a Donggan person in Chinese, if you ask a Donggan person, what are you? What Minzu are you? They would say Huizu. That's how they call themselves. They would say, I'm Hui. Back in this time period, in the late Qing dynasty, Hui meant Muslim. So Sun Yat-sen is grouping together all of the Muslims when he says that. That would include people who would later become the Hui. That would include people who would later become the Uyghurs, the Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, Uzbeks, others. So in the coming decades, Mao Zedong, instead of using that same kind of idea of understanding, Sun Yat-sen's idea became a warlord kind of. The Republic of China was run by warlords in the Northwest, and they did not have the local people's interests at their heart, the best interest of the local people at heart. Mao Zedong saw this and used this to his advantage when the Civil War erupted. The communists in China were outgunned for sure. The nationalists had the support of foreign powers, and Mao and his forces were sent on a long march through the mostly minority regions of China. If you look at a map today, you'll see that all this line that he's moving in on the long march is all minority regions. There are mountain regions, lots of different groups here. So he is using the Soviet models of nationality to appeal to these people. If you work with us, we're going to give you your own autonomous space, and you can continue to use your own languages, your own religions, or whatever. Religion actually is one of the things that's promised here, because the center of Mao's support comes from the Hui people in central China. The Hui people have long had turbulent relationships with each other, and that's kind of how Donggan people ended up in Central Asia. But in this case, the Hui are actually fighting with Mao. At least some of them are fighting with Mao. And the first autonomous region that is founded is actually prior to the People's Republic of China in 1936, the Yuhai Hui Soviet, and that's in central China, where Ningxia is today. And that kind of goes to show how Mao is using these policies in order to have people work with him on different projects like this. You might be wondering, who are the Hui? What language do they speak? They speak Chinese. They speak the regional dialect of Chinese. In kind of modern mindset, we might think these are just Chinese Muslims, aren't they? Because they seem to be culturally Chinese. They don't. The problem is with the Soviet model and with what Mao was working with. In order to grant rights to minorities, they had to be based on ethnicity, according to how he was working this out. So the Hui became an ethnicity essentially, even though they spoke the same language. That's interesting. But the other regions did have separate languages and different cultures and things that were established. Inner Mongolia, Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. Later, the Hui Autonomous Region was basically a redo of the Yuhai County Soviet, Guangxi Zhuang, and Tibetan autonomous region were established later. And so at the beginning, rights were provided for autonomous regions. People could continue to speak their own languages and go to school in their own languages. But then the Cultural Revolution happens. A lot of the Red Guard takes control, and Mao is in support of this as well. Destroy the four olds. This is the classic poster of that time. Get rid of this old stuff, the old junk, like dialects and local languages. You don't need that anymore. We're all going to speak Mandarin from now on. It's going to be the common language. We're looking to the future now. We're going to create the new future, build the new future on the ruins of this old baggage. Fortunately, that doesn't last forever. It does last for a long time. It lasts until Mao's death, essentially. When that happens, we have a split in government, and there are different opinions about how to go forward. Hu Yaobang was incredibly influential in bringing rights back to minority groups in the regions, in the autonomous regions. Hu Yaobang, you might not know the name, it might not be a familiar name to you, but when he died, there was a huge outpouring of support by students from Beijing's universities, and they went to Tiananmen Square. And that became the Tiananmen Square protests and the massacre and everything. That was all starting with Hu Yaobang's death. But even so, Hu Yaobang was very influential, and there was a huge opening that happened, and a publishing boom happened in the minority regions. By the time I went to China in 1995, the currency had minorities on it. They didn't even have like politicians and people. It was like, wow, what a weird place. I was really puzzled by that when I arrived. It was like, who are these people on the money? And the money even has like minority languages on it, and it just seemed like really unexpected. I didn't, yeah. So there's a publishing boom. People are writing about subjects, including food, fortunately for me, because I'm obsessed with food. So I collected a lot of food books when I was there. Most of these books have the word Uyghur in them, in the title: Uyghur foods, Uyghur medicinal foods, Uyghur roasts, different kinds of roasts. So these authors in the 1980s and 90s are actually writing according to Soviet models. They're looking at what's happening in the Soviet Union. They see these national cuisine books, and they're starting to create these things for themselves. It's all written in Uyghur Arabic script. This is the first book that I know of that came out in 1984, Tokti Baki's Uyghur Tomakları. And just an example of the preface to show that this was supported by the state. This was supported by the government. Chinese language books don't usually have the word Uyghur in them when they're talking about foods. They tend to say Xinjiang flavor, Xinjiang delicacies, and that's that was pretty much from the start. They didn't really try to promote this idea that that they didn't try to like overly promote Uyghur foods as opposed to regional things. So that's kind of how things stayed in Chinese. As you may know, so I was really interested in studying Xinjiang, that northwest region. Things have gotten a lot more sensitive nowadays. A lot has changed there. I don't know how much you know about what's changed there, but I'll get into it a little bit later on in the presentation. But it's not like this anymore. It's no longer okay to say Uyghur culture things like Uyghur food. That's not an okay thing to say. It's kind of sensitive, strangely. So this idea of keeping things regional according to like Xinjiang instead, that's much safer, and that is still done today. You can still find books in the bookstores, or you can find things online that talk about Xinjiang things, but Uyghur things are a little bit that's implying that they have their own culture. Sorry to say it that way, but that's kind of how things have changed in today's China. The culture comes from the center, it comes from the Chinese heartland. the minority regions don't really have that kind of level of culture. That's kind of how the sentiment is of government policy these days. It's kind of sad. It's very sad, very, very sad. Um, so jumping to today, I wonder if I should pause. Uh, does anyone have any questions so far? Or any? Is this okay? Is everything okay? Everyone's still doing okay? All right, good. All right, I want to start giving you some examples of today and things that I find interesting about identity and food today. I hope you find them interesting too. Um, these are some uh, influencers on social media that are doing a lot to try to get people interested in Central Asian things, Kazakh things, broadly Central Asian things, Uzbek things. The one on the left, Aygrim Ethnograph is her Instagram handle. She's an ethnographer first, and then became kind of a social media personality with food stuff, and then a restaurateur. So she is behind the Sandık restaurants in Kazakhstan and the Tara cafes in Kazakhstan. Tara means millet. So this idea of, I mean, we'll get into it in a little bit. She's doing a lot in reintroducing um, a new take on traditional Kazakh things. So what we thought we knew from the nationalist canon, she's definitely breaking from that tradition. She's showing all kinds of things that she's saying are kind of lost recipes, lost traditions. She's trying to like reinvigorate this interest in Kazakh culture. The guy in the middle is operating out of Russia, Stalik. I'm going to butcher his last name. I'm not strong with Russian. I use Russian a lot for reading, especially cookbooks, but I'm not a speaker necessarily. But he's big on YouTube. He has got tons of food shows on YouTube, hours and hours and hours and hours of food shows. He's a personality. Um, I think he was born in Uzbekistan, and he has a lot of stories from living in Uzbekistan and living in different places in Central Asia. But he's doing a lot of good work in also breaking from this idea of canon and like there's an essential thing that we have here. He's not concerned with that. He's much more interested in let's look at how people actually eat in Tashkent or something and like in cooking things like that. And then the guy on the right, Bahreddin Chusti, is the chef and owner of Aksu restaurants, and he's also an Instagram personality, and he's frequently traveling around the world, introducing people around the world to Uzbek food. And his books are also incredible. He's got some beautiful, beautiful books. I'll start with Aygrim. She has been working on these kind of lost foods. And I mean, that's kind of how she's framing it. Things that you wouldn't find at a restaurant. If you go to a restaurant, she's really looking at things that are traditional and have been eaten for generations, but things that are a little bit more obscure than what you would find at restaurants. This is an example of a lamb brisket that's wrapped in intestines, braided intestines. A lot of time and energy goes into this particular dish. You can see also her images, the way people are dressed throughout the book. It's very, very different, very different. She also has dishes like the beloved beshbramak, but it's not called that. It's not called that because people don't call it that. I mean, it should be called et asu, and so this is the recipe for that particular dish. Let's see. I wanted to show you a quick video just to give you a sense of this guy's energy and how he's a personality. I hope it works. I didn't click any special boxes. Let me know if you can't hear.
Фигуры сочные, ароматные, крымские фигуры. В Кыргыне, неподалеку от базара, на очень хорошем, таком с коммерческой точки зрения, проходном месте была изрядных размеров чебуречная. Огромная чебуречная, в которую всегда стояла.
So his style is like this. So he's talking about a place and he's complicating this with different ethnicities, different people around. It's very cosmopolitan. But this is an important food in Central Asia. Cheburek is a very important, it's on all menus. It's everywhere. It's probably everywhere throughout post-Soviet Central or post-Soviet lands, I guess. But his videos are fascinating. And I told you before that my Russian isn't very good. But the translations, these are auto translations, and they're really good. I'm really impressed with how far things have come with YouTube. You can really see some incredible material now that was not accessible some years ago with just watching native language things. So check this out. He's a character, and you can see below some of the other videos that he's got. This is Besh Vermak, of course. Besh. Lagman, got a Lagman video, but he doesn't pull his own noodles, I don't think. But yeah, check him out anyway. Some other things are happening that are really, I find very interesting. In this is in Kyrgyzstan, outside of Bishkek. There's ethno complex. So this is meant to be a Kyrgyz restaurant, Kyrgyz traditional foods. You can see the logo of the restaurant is that mill, that hand mill that people use to grind flour. They have a museum as part of this to show you how people used to present, how people used to cook things, how used to prepare things. This is also happening with Aigerim that we saw in a previous slide. Aigerim has she's a co-founder for Sanduk restaurants, and they're kind of doing something similar with Sanduk. Sanduk is like a very modern feel. If you go into a Sanduk restaurant, this is the kind of, you'll expect to see people dressed in costumes, playing music. It's a very modern experience, but it's also very traditional in different ways, where they have dishes that they're actually the same dishes that would be in her cookbook, actually. So that's the kind of stuff that they're serving at the restaurants. There's also fast food options that are happening that are just different burger type things that are based on traditional foods, wraps of different kinds that are based on traditional foods, largely grilled things that are made into fast food options. Really interesting. Non-Kaurduk. So you can see, like, just underneath here, Baurduk is the name of the restaurant. Below here it says non-Kaurduk. Kaurduk is like it's like a braise or a roast, not roast. It's like a stewed meat and potatoes usually, but this is probably in a bun. Baursak is fried bread in Kazakh bakery. Really interesting. Turkmenistan doesn't get a lot of love internationally, and they don't really have the social media stars to kind of help that along. But they are doing food related outreach at some level. They opened up 10 years ago this wheat museum because there were archaeological finds in Turkmenistan that kind of pointed to very early use of wheat, earlier than had been expected. So this is kind of like them trying to kind of reclaim a position on this in the Silk Road world of food history. Turkmenistan really deserves to be part of that history because there's so many important things that happen there. And there's still a lot of archaeology that's got to be worked through to just pinpoint how things moved across the region. But it was definitely an important place. It was a very cosmopolitan place in ancient times. So yeah, a lot to learn from Turkmenistan and Tajikistan as well. I don't have a slide for Tajikistan, but kind of a similar situation where they just don't have a social media presence yet. I wanted to throw this out there. This is like a 40-page article that I found in a journal. It's in Uyghur language. But it was really interesting. It was about a guy, he's a scientist that's based in the UK, he's Uyghur, and he's traveling around Central Asia, and he's just recounting his experiences, meeting people, talking about his being Uyghur. Like they usually ask him, how come you speak Kyrgyz or whatever? What are you? And he'll say Uyghur. And the first thing that they say is like, oh, Uyghurs make good lagman, something like that. And over time, he gets really annoyed with this because everyone says it. Everyone says it. And he's like, do you know anything else about Uyghurs? And there was like, no. And he'll like start listing things. But some of those things are kind of shared across borders. So like Some of the national heroes of Uyghurs are also the national heroes of Kyrgyz, so that's kind of like, um, uh, but at the same time, he when he goes to a restaurant in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, and if Uyghur lagman is on the menu, he feels obligated to buy it to get it because he loves it so much and he can't not get it if it's on the menu. So it's a really interesting piece on the struggle, Lagman as the Uyghur identity, basically in Central Asia. That's also kind of the case in Xinjiang too. Uyghur is definitely a food that people eat on a daily basis in Xinjiang. But leaving Xinjiang, I think maybe it strengthens this identity because Uyghurs are known for lagmans in Central Asia. If you go to a restaurant and you hear that there's a Uyghur chef, you know that there's going to be good lagman on the menu, and it's a thing. In this article, he also has this piece about the largest lagman initiated in Almaty in in the 2000s. I forgot which year it was. I think it was 650 pounds. This is the picture from that article. But this should also remind you of that Nations of Plav and Beshbarmak with that same. It seems to be like a desire to be seen on a world stage, having your ethnicity connected to some sort of a food that's going to go down in the Guinness Book of World Records. And so this was also an important thing for him to add into this, just because he thought it was great to be in the Guinness Book of World Records. Okay, diaspora. Look where we are now. We deliver Chorsu, Uzbek national foods. And on this sign, Uzbek national foods, Uzbek mili taumlari, manti, toyoshi, naran, samsa, non, mastava. You know where this is? It's in Philadelphia. Look at the sign. The sign has Uzbek on it. Uzbek mili taumlari. Like, if you go to Uzbekistan and you're looking for Uzbek food, you look for these words. Mili taumlari. That means national foods. This is a genre in Uzbekistan. It's become a genre. So we talked about the canonization, how they have like I showed you the Kazakh national foods book, but the Uzbek, it's a genre of food. So and they call it by this name. But they're also using this name in Philadelphia, which is really interesting. I mean, their audience base clearly is Uzbeks, not Philadelphians, because Philadelphians would be like, what the hell is a national, like they just wouldn't get it. But it's amazing, isn't it? Isn't it amazing that we have this in Philadelphia? There's another restaurant in kind of downtown Philadelphia, Silk Way, Jibek Jolu. It's a Kazakh restaurant. And the menu, they talk about the menu as if these are all points on the Silk Road, and it's the Silk Way restaurant. So therefore, it makes sense to have sweet and sour eggplant together with salad olivier, together with achuchuk, together with dolma from the Mediterranean, together with samsa from Uzbekistan, together with cheberek from Crimea, lagman from Uyghur regions, pelmen from Russia, borscht from Russia, mianpian from China, from Dungan Uyghur. So that's kind of the story that they're putting forth here. But what is the story really? Has anyone traveled to Kazakhstan and eaten at a Kazakh restaurant?
Well, there is no Kazakh food.
Does this look familiar to you, Azamat?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I grew up in a kind of Russified culture. Like some of these are obviously Russian, but the fact that Kazakhstan is also extremely diverse as a country,
Yep.
and maybe they can. So the national Kazakh food would be the food of all these ethnicities that are represented there, right? So all of these
Yeah.
foods can legitimately come from Kazakhstan, even though they're
Yeah.
called Russian, Dungan, and whatnot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I really see this as like kind of a Soviet experience menu as opposed to,
Yeah.
but and this looks exactly like what you would find in Almaty. If you went to a restaurant in Almaty, you would have these sorts of options on the menu. It's just really, yeah, fascinating. But they're spinning it as kind of a Silk Road thing. And this was also alluded to in that article about the nations of Beshbarmak and Bluff. Um, We also have markets that are opening up in Philadelphia. We have a really quickly growing Central Asian population, I think, up in the Northeast. And there's long been Eastern European markets, Ukrainian markets up there, but now we're starting to get specific Central Asian markets. So on the left, we have Vatan, which is kind of like homeland market. And inside, you'll find very special things that only Tajiks, Uzbeks, Kyrgyz would be looking for. Like just, it's a special place. They have a beautiful fruit section. I'm getting late on my for tea. They have like rock candy or the solidified grape juice sugar for tea. All kinds of really special things. On the right, we see Samarkand Cafe, Alibaba Market up in Bustleton too. They have this fake facade of the Registan. It's all just just a board up that it looks kind of believable. We also have a Lagman house that just opened up like 2 months ago. It's supposed to be the first Uyghur Lagman house. Actually, it's the second already. So we have two Uyghur restaurants, Uyghur themed restaurants here in Philadelphia already. We have about 20 Central Asia themed restaurants in Philadelphia. Finally, I wanted to get to an example that's a little bit closer to heart. Most of my time in Central Asia was in the Chinese side and in Xinjiang. And I have been collecting cookbooks for a long time. I'm really obsessed with stuff like this. I went to Xinjiang in 2018 was my last time there. I was taking students to Mongolia and I had a free week, so I came just to kind of see how bad things were because I knew things were bad. There was at that point people who were born in particular places in Xinjiang, they were recalled to their hometowns in order to be questioned for some reason. And then they were often not allowed to go back to wherever they were working. So for the Uyghurs that were living in Beijing and big cities out east, they didn't really return. Most didn't return. Some did. It was a very strange time, a very crazy time. I couldn't talk to anybody because everyone was so paranoid, so afraid of being like taken away, taken to jail for talking to a foreigner or something. So every time I would make eye contact with somebody, they would quickly look away and just like try to avoid me. And that is definitely a different situation from being in Xinjiang in the 90s. People were so friendly and outgoing. Something else, like the businesses that were suspect of anything, bookstores. I love bookstores. I love going to bookstores. These bookstores are closed temporarily. The one on the left was closed for maintenance or something, but this is the sticker that's on all the businesses that are suspect of something. And you can see that this store was suspect before, and they cleared that or they disregarded it or something, and then they were closed again, shuttered. The one on the right is a state bookstore. This is the state Chinese bookstore, and the sign in the window says, "We're studying now, temporarily closed." Studying is a euphemism for going to the camp. A lot of people had to go to the camp for partial day service. They would go to learn Chinese and they would go to learn Chinese law and who knows what else they had to do there, but a lot of people had to go to the schools, at least for part of the day, including people who worked at this bookstore. A lot of people were locked up and not released. This happened to a lot of professors in universities, people who specialized in Uyghur cultural things. Um, I have a dear friend who's in prison right now, but he was a specialist in Chagatai literature, Proto-Uyghur literature from. And so the businesses in Kashgar at this time, 2018, they were relying on staff from the villages around Kashgar. Those staff were returned to the villages and not allowed to come back, so the businesses went out of business. Some of them were still running, but it was just a weird time to be there, very uncomfortable for everyone. The night market was kind of devoid of any activities. I didn't take a picture. I didn't take so many pictures. I wish I took more pictures, but then there was such a police presence and I felt really uncomfortable with that. So I came back home. I still collected books. Whatever books I found, I bought. And I'm happy I did because they ended up banning books published prior to 2016. So all the Uyghur language books, all of those amazing books back from the 90s were banned and confiscated from the bookstores. So those are not able to be purchased anymore. So I used to feel bad about buying all these books and maybe somebody actually needed to see this and I was just using it for reference materials. But actually I'm happy I did that because they probably would have gone away anyway. So I came back to the States. COVID happened. I was buying a lot of things online, like probably all of you were, and I was monitoring Taobao, and I found a complete set of these Uyghur language cookbooks on Taobao. So I bought them and I got them in the mail because I had most of them, but I was missing a few issues, a few So this is the bread one on top. There was like a noodle one. They're all these. It's fascinating. Really, really great cookbooks. I got them in the mail, and I realized that there were new publications. They stopped publishing Uyghur language materials in 2016, but they started again in 2021 with a limited set of a few different things, mostly Xi Jinping thought, Chinese law. Those things were published in Uyghur, but this was published also. So I was really excited. I was excited. I thought maybe things are opening, maybe things are changing. And then I realized that they're different than the books that I used to have. So I wanted to show you some examples of that and puzzle through this a little bit. Can you see how they're different? So the title of the series used to be Uyghur Food and Drink Culture, and they would analyze different topics. And that was problematic now. So they changed the series title to Food and Drink Booklets, Food and Drink Recipes. Anything else that you notice here? Can you just shout it out? I know you've seen it. You've seen it. Ah, no mustache. What's up with that? Is that crazy? Let's look at the back. So the old backs of the books used to have the chef, author, and kind of background on the author. But they changed that too. They made it the covers of all the other books in the series. Was it because the chef had a mustache? Was it because the chef wrote books about Uyghur foods? Unclear. But I found pictures of that chef in 2020, shaven, as he was being honored for a big kind of lifetime achievement award type thing. His name is Yunus Hamdullah. Hamdullah means thanks to God, right? But his name in Chinese has been abbreviated to Hamdu. So thanks. Other things that were edited out of the books. In the bread book, there was a huge article, a 12-page article about the history of Uyghur bread culture that included archaeological finds and kind of tracing this history from ancient times up to the present, how bread culture has kind of remained intact. That was completely deleted from the new editions. Any reference to Uyghurs having a particular place in this story, in this broader story of global food culture, was deleted. The words Uyghur, whenever they appeared, they're deleted. Even though the work is in Uyghur language itself, the words Uyghur it's like too sensitive. Uyghur culture, those are sensitive things. The old editions had transliterations into Chinese from the Uyghur, so that kind of like it wasn't just a translation into Chinese, it was a transliteration. So it was kind of paying a little bit more respect to the original name of the dish in Uyghur. There was also I realized after seeing all these things, I started realizing something else that happened that I didn't even notice. For the early editions, the ones that were published from 2007 to 2015, there was actually, this is part of a movement among Uyghur intellectuals to try to remove Chinese references out of the language. So what they were doing back then, from 2007 to 2015, they were naming things. They were trying to remove all the Chinese words. You may know that lagman, for example, is a Chinese word. They didn't mess with that one. That one's too ingrained. But other dishes, like I can't think of any examples right now. They went out of their way to try to find Uyghur words that would work instead. So the new publications reverted back to the Chinese words for all of those cases. This is an example of words that I found. In the left column, these are all Uyghur words that they came up with to use for basic things like potatoes, garlic chives, celery, garlic scapes, these sorts of things that used to be called by Chinese words. And in the new editions, this was all reverted to the Chinese words because that it was kind of determined that this is the way it should be because it was already comfortable. People were using those words anyway, so why don't we just but it was a top-down kind of decision, of course. So yeah, interesting censorship things. You would think, I mean, food, cookbooks, that's safe. That's not political, right? I guess the whole point of this talk is that, right? Identity, politics, food, these are all connected, right? And you can see it very clearly in this example, how connected this is, that they would go through such lengths to wipe off the mustache of all the cartoon chefs through all the pages of the book. that's a lot of work. Like, wow, wow. Something else that was happening in the same kind of vein is de-halalization. Restaurants used to mark their signage with halal markers, and you can see that there's something missing up here. That's where the halal mark used to be. And same case here. These are images from Joanne Smith Finley, a friend who was also doing research in Xinjiang around the same time. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. And I want to hear from you because I don't like talking in a vacuum for so long. I want to hear what you're thinking. Maybe you've seen some similar things in other presentations throughout the year that sound familiar, that maybe match up with some of these timings of like when the canonization of national cuisines happens or something. Otherwise, let's talk about how food fits into your culture.